and happy Sunday. Good morning. It's Dr. Bill, and we are ready for another episode of Beyond Limits, where spirit meets science. Super excited about today, actually, because our last podcast episode, we introduced the preview of what's coming over the next 12 to 18 months in terms of the programming. And it's really tied to the upcoming book that I have coming out in early Q1 next year, which is on conscious leadership where spirit meets science. I don't have an exact title for the book yet, but that's based on the 80 plus talks that I've given over the years, and is geared towards leadership application of this scientist who was on a spiritual journey and making those connections there. So today's episode actually is a kickoff of that, the first one officially. And we just did a preview last time. And so anyway, really excited about this. It's also tied to my upcoming TEDx talk, so I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But first, let's go through a guided breathing meditation or sequence here, because we want to create some heart-brain synchronization, and we're going to talk about that today as well. So what I want you to do right now is to inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 2 seconds, and then exhale for 6 seconds. All right? So let's do that right now. And again, you breathe in through your nose and not through your mouth. This is typical for meditation practice. So anyway, we'll start with that. Breathe in through your nose. And I want you to do that 2 more times. And as you're doing this, I want you to think about tuning in to your inner field. Okay, tune out the outside world, and let's tune in to our inner field, or the essence of who we are, this spiritual being having a human experience. Let's really tune into that. And as we do that, we're going to explore how the frequency of truth reshapes our leadership, our relationships, and our lives. So again, breathe in. Hold it for a couple seconds, and then you exhale through the mouth, okay? And close your eyes while you're doing this, and feel that inner essence of who you are, the voice that comes from within. Tune into that. And what's going on outside of you is not important. Don't pay any attention to that. Don't think about, I got to do this, I got to do that. No, right now I want you to be present in this moment and sit with that. Okay? So again, our episode today is actually titled "The Integrity is a Frequency and the Physics of Authenticity." And again, I talked about this already, but the first episode, our last episode 25, was about introducing the book, the upcoming TEDx talk. And how did that come about? That's a good question. Okay, so I've been talking for years or whatever. I relaunched my personal brand in April, and I wasn't even considering writing a business type book, for leadership at the time, and just doing this podcast. Although much of what I've talked about over the years certainly has leadership applications, of course. Like, for example, resilience. We did an episode on resilience recently here. And being a leader, it requires a certain amount of resilience to move through the difficult times. And so when I did that episode, within 3 weeks after that, I had several people reach out to me and just say, "Hey, Dr. Bill, have you thought about writing a business book? Well, your podcast on resilience was really cool." Okay, and it had some great message there. And I had a framework to follow there for that particular episode. So I didn't really know how I was going to do that, so I went back and I looked at all the talks that I have done, and I only made those available publicly again in April of this year. They were sitting on my computer for years, and of course I had migrated to doing a video podcast a year and a half ago. But I was thinking, okay, I really want to be able to have these available for people to listen to. So that was my intent in April when we relaunched the website and my brand. And there's a Spotify channel called Insights for the Soul that contains all these talks that I gave. But I took the transcripts from all those and I pulled them all together and looked at how we could pull out from that kind of the science piece of that with a science hook, the spiritual takeaway, and the leadership application. And so that's the framework for the new book, which is, I can't tell you how excited I am. It's so fun. So I pivoted from my other 3 remaining books that I was working on to compile and migrated to this one, because this is for a couple of reasons. One, I want to have this published before the TEDx hits the airways, which is probably in the springtime sometime, or a few months, Q2 probably, or something like that. We're actively putting applications out for the talk. So, and we also pivoted, it was my suggestion that we pivoted to the topic integrity as a frequency, because it's kind of at the core of all this in terms of this, this physics of authenticity that I want to talk about. And again, the theme for season 3, which is the next 12 episodes, is on the physics of presence. Okay, and so today's episode, we're gonna see the future episodes on faith, thermodynamics, emotional alchemy, and flow. In fact, we'll be back here again next Sunday talking about the biology of belief and faith, and I actually have a guest that's coming on for that show too, so I'll tell you more about that this week. I'll send out a post about that, but excited about that. So let's talk about the core concept of integrity as a frequency. What does that really mean? And if you think about it, once I go through this, it'll become very clear to you. But, let's talk about integrity beyond morality, right? It's not an ethics checklist, although this is my philosophy about doing the right thing and all that. But it's more than that, okay? So it's more about a coherence. It's an alignment of your thoughts, your words, your actions, and energy. And every thought you have, every word you speak, every action you take, whether inspired or not, all has an energy to it. And it goes, you're putting that out into the world, and it's like, you're taking a pebble on a still pond and you're tossing that into the pond, and boom, has a ripple effect in terms of an energy. The energy is transferred to those waves that go out concentrically from the center. Well, you are the center, and so everything you do has a frequency to it, and it's measurable, and people feel it, and it's contagious. And these are the aspects of leadership that not a lot of people focus on and talk about. They talk about the practical steps or how to accomplish things, how to lead teams, or whatever. That's all great, but it's so much more than that, because underlying all of that is this frequency and this coherence that you are generating from yourself. You're an electromagnetic field. In fact, your heart has the largest electromagnetic field in the body. And I know this because, well, one, the Heart Math Institute has done a lot of research on this. There's an energy, electromagnetic radiation or frequency from what comes from your heart. But even more so, that's why when we, at university, when we were working with these big magnets, nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and we were generating there's a high field magnet area. There's a certain area you don't go into because it affects your body. And not to mention, if you had a pacemaker, for example, it would throw that all out of whack. So, but for sure you have this energy, because again, everything is energy. And I talk about this all the time. So because of that, you really need to be mindful of your thoughts, because everything you think about is creative, good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, if you're not aligned with your inner self in terms of this coherence, then you're going to be out of integrity for the essence of who you are, okay? And it's this alignment, this frequency is actually measurable. We'll talk about that. And like, again, people feel it, and it's contagious, and that's what attracts people to you for whatever you're doing, because of this energy field, the frequency that you're emanating from yourself. So this is the core concept for integrity as a frequency. So let's talk about the physics of authenticity now, okay? And for that, I'm kind of going to draw on my quantum mechanics here. I love quantum mechanics, by the way. At university I got an A in quantum mechanics. I loved how the science, in fact, I never understood calculus until I actually did quantum mechanics. Then it all made sense, because calculus is just such an abstract math that it's hard to understand it until you actually apply it to principles, and then it became really clear. And I often think about it would be kind of cool if I was back at the beginning of the 20th century sitting around with Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and all these guys as they were coming up with this theory of quantum mechanics. And of course, at that time, even Albert Einstein didn't even believe in it. Okay, because the only thing known from a physics to explain how the universe or the world around us operates was basically Newtonian physics, things that we could physically see. But when you got down to the quantum level, or the energy, which is an energy, by the way, there's packets of energy there, the whole dynamic of physics that we understood up until that point can no longer explain that. So this coherence in physics, this concept of that, what it means in physics is ordered energy states, right? And so if I go back to my example of NMR, when we put a sample inside this big superconducting magnet was supercooled, every molecule that's in that sample, and likewise in our bodies, has an energy to it, has a spin. There's an energy in terms of the electrons and everything that's going on there. And the magnetic field brings everything into alignment, everything's going in a certain direction in terms of the energy state. And then you're pulsing with radio frequencies. Now, I know this is more technical than you want to hear, but the reality is this is how we manipulate matter that we can't even see to determine the structures of compounds and unknown substances. This is just one tool that we can do that. But let's take that and apply that to leadership, right? Because in an analogous way, we're aligning those inner states within us, okay? And there's an energetic state for us that flows through and outwards from us. So when your coherence increases, when you're more in alignment with those energy states within you, energy flows with less resistance, okay? And so like entropy and flow and heart-brain synchronization, which we'll talk about in some later episodes in more detail, but all of that proceeds from an energy flow. And if you've ever, just take a simple example of where you're really connected with all that is and this energy that's flowing through you. And the best example I can ever give is when you go out into nature or you're sitting on the beach, there's no one around, you're just listening to the waves. You're getting in synchronicity or alignment with that energy, right? Which has a rhythm to it, has a cadence, and you become coherent with that. And you see that beautiful, it's surreal, it's not something that you can actually explain. But if we were to measure the energy states within your body, your heart rate variability, HRV, we'll talk about that in a minute, we would see a big difference there. And of course, this is what meditation and this practice of meditation, I always say you need a spiritual practice, whatever that is for you. But I've been doing meditation for many years. I've been teaching that. And it's hard for people to get into that state. I know it's challenging. But throughout my podcast here and the future episodes and so on, we're going to talk more and more about that and those practices that you can do at home. We'll have a takeaway for one today, actually, for you as an example. But again, this coherence increases. And you're ordering the inner states within your body here, okay? Now, what is the human impact of that? Okay, simply put, people don't follow titles. Just because someone says they're CEO and president, people don't follow that. And nobody ever does. In fact, the most successful brands, let's talk business for a minute, or any leader with any sort of industry or whatever that's been very successful, wasn't because of their title. It was because of their authenticity, which has an energy state, something they really believed, they were passionate about. And for me, that's Nutriselect and how that's going to change people's health and transform a whole industry, because it is about doing the right thing. It is about finding alignment with the users so that they can find science-based supplements that work for them, right? And so, but again, people don't follow titles. They sync to your signal, whatever it is that's emanating from you that you're putting out into the universe. Now, I don't particularly care for politics, but there have been pretty influential leaders over the years in many different places around the world that was from a political standpoint, but those people had great influence. Any big movement, you know, what Mother Teresa did or what Martin Luther King or others, those leaders had embodied this coherence, and that created a trust effortlessly where people really followed them, believed they would follow them everywhere to do that. Now, that can be good or bad. And the leader doesn't know any difference, because if they really believe what they're saying and that's what it is, well, then this is what they're going to communicate, and this is the kind of frequency they're going to send out. But I choose to look at this from a positive aspect of how people sync to our signal. And I started to say this earlier, but for brands that are super successful in the industry, well, the reason they are was because there was a connection with the users of whoever bought that product or service with the people who were leading that, or talked about how they were doing that. It became a belief system. They synced to the frequency of those leaders and their signal, right? So leaders, when they embody this coherence, create trust effortlessly. All right. So I'll give you an example from my career that happened some years ago, back in, I'd say 2006, I think. I was actually running a particular company at the time, one of my previous ventures, and I have different partners for that. Now, as a multi-time founder, I've been through a lot of experience. I probably got my MBA in the School of Hard Knocks here. But I didn't have good partners there who didn't align with what my frequency was and what my mission was to bring healing to people and what I was doing with that effort. But we signed a contract with this company. The CEO of that company was totally aligned with the project, and we were moving forward with that. And then not very long after that, the upper management, the board of directors, decided they wanted to go a different direction, and they ousted the CEO. And then suddenly we had this contract, they weren't going to go forward with the business, that sort of thing. But I had this really great idea for a product that I wanted to bring to the market, and it was really based in science and all that. And but my partners for the current business there weren't interested. They didn't see that. They just didn't see my vision for that. So, you know, my advice when I'm talking to founders, and I'm an advisor with Startups.com, is you want to make sure that everyone you're involved with, that you're partnering with, is actually aligned to you in this way. And how are they aligning? Everything we're talking about today, this is at the core of it. They sync to your signal. And they can only do that if you're confident in yourself and you're authentic in terms of what you want to create in the world and how you put that out energetically. That will attract the right people and the right partners into your ecosystem, right? So, long story short on this, the CEO who left, which I didn't understand why they did all that, it's just, you know, business and politics or whatever. And I told her about my idea for the product, and I said, my partners don't want to do this. And she said, well, then let's just go do it, and wrote me a check for $200,000 on the spot. So that's what I'm talking about, syncing to your signal. So it wasn't meant for that business, and she wasn't meant to stay with the other company for whatever reason, and that launched a new venture with this product that I took to market, and actually launched at Natural Products Expo in 2007. So, you know, that funding came from that. So that just gives you an example of that human impact. I didn't actively go out trying to raise capital for it. I wasn't looking for that. And so a lot of times new founders, that's what they do. They're kind of going out there to do that. But from a spiritual aspect, you have to be very much connected and aligned with what you're doing. If you're doing something you don't believe in, well, that's going to send the wrong signals, right? It's going to attract the wrong people. And maybe you're doing it because you need to do it or something like that. We've all been in that situation before. But the impact of that is it doesn't align with us at the end of the day, and it ends up not lasting. Okay, it fails, right? So let's talk about heart-brain coherence. Okay, this is the science of integrity. Okay, and it's also the essence of what I'll be doing in my actual TEDx message when I deliver this. But HRV, if you have a wearable device like this is a Fitbit, it measures HRV, which is heart rate variability. But let's think about HRV as a leadership metric. Okay, so we can actually apply what I'm talking about on a level that we can't necessarily see, but we feel it and we know it when we align with things, right? But this is a way that we can actually measure that. And so what does HRV actually measure, right? So it measures your frequency, right? Your frequency is measurable, right? Remember I said your heart, and the Heart Math Institute has proven this and done research on this, has a certain frequency or rhythm to it. So, and you know this intuitively, and you know it by your own experience. If you're all stressed out, then guess what? You're incoherent. You're not even in alignment with the essence of who you are. You've created a lot of static and noise, and guess what? That's going to show up in your HRV spectrum there in terms of how it looks. It's going to look all jagged and irregular, right? But on the flip side of that, again, that signal is reflected by your heart rhythm, right? So your heart rhythm is going to measure that. But if you, and this is why it's so important to have a spiritual practice and meditation to reground and center yourself. It is not like you do once a day. You do it whenever you feel like you need to do it, whenever you need to realign, come back into coherence with your spiritual being of what you want to do in this world. And suddenly that HRV graph is going to change. It's going to shift from jagged to smooth, rhythmic, wave-like, right? And there's also brain waves too, all right, that happen, that emanate from your brain as well. So this brain-heart coherence thing, when you're aligned, when you're calm, when you're focused and you're authentic, your HRV is going to rise, okay? And that connection alignment, we can actually measure today with the technology. We can see it. And there's actually devices beyond the Fitbit or a Ring or whatever. There's other instruments out there that can actually do that and give you more detailed information. But this is a good way for us to do that. We can kind of look at that and see how it's measured there. And if you're doing something that you don't feel right about or doesn't feel aligned energetically, well, guess what? It's going to show up in your HRV. It's going to really identify that, and it's not going to feel good. And sometimes we may not be even conscious of that. We may be in something that we know is on some level, is it right? Our gut tells us that, but we don't want to know on some level because maybe it's going to create some major change. Maybe it's going to transform the essence of what you're in. Well, that's what happened to me in the story I shared with you just a moment ago. Everything transformed, okay? But then it moved into coherence in a beautiful way where very rapidly we were able to launch the product and do all that. So when you move into this state, then your energy becomes ordered, like we talked about. It becomes aligned with that. It's aligned to the authenticity of what you're doing or what you believe in or what you're passionate about, okay? And again, people don't follow titles. They sync to your coherence. So if you're out of whack, guess what? You're not going to attract the right people. Founders, if you're trying to raise capital and you're not totally aligned with what you're doing, you're not going to attract the capital. It's not going to show up in your life, right? So again, integrity is a frequency, and we want to lead from a place of coherence. That's where we want to go. So, and that's why this is, we pivoted on the TEDx talk. I originally was going to do something else when we started putting out the applications. And by the way, it takes about, on average, I've been told with the man or agency that I'm working with, because he's got one of the top 500 most successful TED Talks, 2.7 million views. That takes about 84 applications. So we're probably a third of the way through it, finding the events to do that. So again, we pivoted to this so we had time to do that, which is kind of my point here, is that, okay, this is going to appeal to more people, I think, where we're going to use HRV as a leadership metric, and we'll demonstrate that actually in the TED Talk, hopefully if the event organizers have a way to do that. But again, we're going to explain how these coherent emotional states produce reliable or predictable HRV signatures, right? And then leadership resonance, okay? So what's the science behind that? Well, if you have increased HRV, then it increases your intuition, because if you're aligned and then the energy is flowing in, you're going to see things you didn't see before. You're going to get inspired by certain things that you hadn't thought of. And this has happened to me countless times, more than I can tell you. When you have this alignment and energy and you feel that it resonates within you, and then a thought will come in and it's like, oh yeah, let's go do that. Well, that's how I'm building Nutriselect, to be quite honest with you, because everything that's coming into my ecosystem for that, building that company and how we're going to do it, is aligning to the right people, the right partners, and the same energy and passion that we have, the same goal and vision that we have in terms of how we want to change the industry. And guess what? That brings in new ideas of things I hadn't even thought of myself. I'm a pretty smart guy. I know the science, I know the technology, but I was like, oh, okay. The thought comes in, it's like, oh, I didn't even think of that. That's great. Let's just pursue it then. That's when you take the inspired action. All right. So this increased coherence increases relational trust as a leader, right? So as you're bringing more people into your ecosystem, and if they don't resonate with you right away, they may later, right? I've had that happen where I'm talking to somebody and it seems like we're connected, but then I don't hear from them for a while. Then suddenly they reach out and they want to update and they want to see what we're doing. And then there's even more alignment because they're coming more into a resonance with that. So the influence, so you as a leader can have a stronger influence without putting forward any major effort, because it's easier that way, guys. If you really are passionate on what you're doing, believe what you're doing it for the right reasons, well, that's going to resonate with people, okay? So this positioning, or this position's integrity as a measurable frequency. So, and I just mentioned this briefly, just on my own experience, even just most recently, just building Nutriselect. I went in different paths in terms of reaching out to potential partners or whatever, because there was sort of an inspired action that came out. It's not like I had a roadmap planned out that I was going to do this, this, and this. It's evolved on its own energy there because it came in at the right time. And it also attracted investor interest from all over the world, to the point of almost on a daily basis at one point. So again, I didn't have to go find that. It's really unseen. Now, maybe you think, and this is true too, when you're talking to someone physically in person, whether you're in with so many feet, they're really going to feel your energy. Okay, they're really going to come into sync with you, and there'll be a coherence and alignment there. If it resonates with them. And this is why I say in my spiritual teachings and everything I've been doing for years is to follow what resonates with you. Because even something I say may not even resonate with you today. Maybe it will later, maybe it never will. But something else will, okay? And so it's not a straightforward sort of black and white, cut and dry way of growing on your spiritual path and teachings and stuff like that. And I used to think that, actually. I think there were certain ways that things were supposed to happen, but the reality is each individual themselves has their own journey and has something they're putting out into the world. Because we're here to do two things. One, we're meant to capitalize or embrace our gifts and talents. And then secondly, apply those in service to others. This is our only mission and why we're here. And so if you don't know what it is for you, that's where meditation can help you find that coherence and alignment and that energy connection with what it is that you feel like you need to do. Don't qualify it, pursue it. Don't even hesitate when that happens. And yes, it's true, it will cause major changes in your life, and you will certainly have to make some hard decisions. But that until you do that, you won't be in full alignment or coherence with the essence of who you are. So when you're talking to someone, as an example, that's real obvious. You can see that, you feel that connection with someone, and they're syncing to your state, and you're syncing to theirs, right? Not necessarily your words. They feel something with you as they're talking to you. And I would venture to say that extends to video calls and by emails. You create an energy that's unseen. I mean, if we talk, I don't want to get into quantum mechanics or string theory and how that happens, but and that's probably difficult to measure. except from the outcomes of that experience when you see what happens. Then you know that there was some syncing or alignment there that you weren't even thinking of. You hadn't even met the person in person, right? And so for me, I'm talking to a potential partner in Germany, her and her company. Great background. They want to bring Nutriselect to all of Europe. They want to be the partner. They proposed that. Well, I had already put out in the universe that I needed to find the right partner who understood the vision of what we're trying to do to come into our ecosystem and come find me, and they did. Okay, and now we have this new potential partner that we're just in the early discussion stages of that, where there's an incredible alignment with the essence of what we're doing. So how does that happen, right? This is a person who reached out to me on LinkedIn and connected to me. I didn't know them, but they thought they somehow found their way to what I was talking about, either what I wrote about or posted or whatever, and they wanted to connect with them. And as they got deeper into them, they realized there was a huge alignment there. And so that's not something I planned. Like I had a roadmap that as a business leader, CEO of my company, that, okay, I'm going to go identify a company or person and take a very logical approach to do that. Well, you can do that. It'll take you a long time and you probably won't find the right partner. So it's better to let go of that and be in the flow of bringing those things and those relationships in that way. And it starts with you. You have to align that with yourself first, okay? And then people will sync to you. They will come into your orbit. They'll come into your ecosystem. You don't have to go find it. They will come to you effortlessly, okay? I know this countless times from experience. So let's do the integrity resonance test, okay? This is a practical tool that you can use every day, and then I want you to use it this week. So there's 5 steps to this. So the first steps, and this is a practical experiential tool, so you can do it as part of your meditation or whatever. And by the way, this will be referenced in my book. It's actually in chapter 3 on truth as a level of consciousness, but you'll see that in the book as well. But so if you missed this, you can go back and listen to the episode or whatever. So step 1, identify an area. And by the way, set the stage for this. Sorry, you want to have no distractions, right? You want to take time to go within it. It's almost like a meditation in a sense, but do some breath work, get in line, get quiet in a quiet area, whatever. And then the first step is to identify an area in your life where your words do not match your actions, okay? Only you know what that is for you. So think about something you've said, but it doesn't actually match your actions. Like maybe you told somebody you were going to do something, but you never acted on it, okay? Step 2, identify an area where your actions do not match your emotions, okay? So maybe you're doing something, but it's not what you really want to do. It doesn't match your feelings of how you feel about that. So think about that. Step 3, identify an area where your emotions do not match your truth. And when I say your truth, I mean your truth, the essence of who you are. So if you're feeling emotionally a certain way about something, but you know subconsciously on some level this doesn't match your truth, this is authentically not who you are, then you're out of alignment, right? And that's the next step. Step 4 is like, ask yourself, where am I holding a double signal? In other words, you're doing one thing, you're feeling one thing, whatever, but your actions are doing something else and it doesn't align with your truth, okay? We've all done this because we let our egos drive how we go through life and do that sort of thing. But take a step back from that and go through these steps. And then now, step 5, final step. What would coherence look like here? In that situation, whatever situation you thought of, what would coherence look like if it was aligned with your truth, your emotions, and your actions? What do you think the outcome would be? I'll tell you, it'll be pretty amazing in ways that you hadn't even thought of. So this is a first practice that you can use weekly throughout season 3 as we go through these episodes, and of course the book when it comes out in Q1 and more detail that we deep dive into this stuff. Okay, so think about all that. Now, So let me share with you another story from my own journey that kind of shows, kind of my field notes from the journey, right? That shows this link to integrity and coherence, right? I could think of many, many examples. In fact, before the podcast, I was trying to think, okay, what's a really good story to share there? There's a lot of them. But I want you to hypothetically think about this for yourself for a second. So were there any moments during on your spiritual journey where truth became a frequency that you felt rather than an idea? Well, the best example I can get for that for myself is my writing, okay? And I never thought of myself as a writer and writing anything inspirational at all, to be quite honest. But it just happened by chance back in, I started journaling through the 90s, and then the early 2000s, I was, there was some point in there, I was 30 years ago, I started doing meditation, and I was working my way into that and growing. It's an evolution. It's a process to go through all that. But I wrote my first poem when I was actually taking coursework from Centers for Spiritual Living. I was actually considering going into ministry for that. And if you know Michael Beckwith, that's where he started, and then he went and founded Agape, his church in Los Angeles. But he talks about visioning versus visualization, all that kind of stuff. And I took all this coursework, and one of the project was I actually wrote a poem, and but then that really evolved for me. That was my first poem, and it's in my book. It just got published here in August, Divine Whisper, so you can go read that. I won't tell you which poem it is, but the poems are not in any particular chronological order. They're organized by love and spirit, the two different headings. But many, many times, in fact, more times than I can count, all of my writing, and let's talk about my poetry, because poetry is harder to write than writing other types of works, because there's a real alignment or coherence with that in terms of feeling the energy of that situation. And I've written dozens of poems, and everyone had a story behind it and how I came to write that. And a lot of times it just would start, I would be meditating. Sometimes it would come to me just doing whatever. I would just see something out in nature, or I'd feel something or whatever, and that would prompt me to think, oh, that'd be a great poem. And it's like a seed gets planted from the divine, so to speak, that's what I call it, that says, okay, explore this, go down this rabbit hole. And then I would just sit and meditate. And most of my poems have a rhyming or cadence to them. I didn't know anything about writing poetry. It's just what felt aligned with me and the rhythm. And that's why it's called Divine Whispers, because it's like I'm communicating with another realm where this energy comes in. And then the energy of that particular poem, whatever that's about, comes from that space where I'm sitting with it. And I'm meditating about it, and maybe I'm putting on some music, or I'm meditating, I have my eyes closed, and then suddenly the words will just start to flow. And they'll just come out on the paper, and I just write them. So all of my poems were written by hand first before I typed them up. And I have tons of journals and notebooks to do that. And that's where I would start writing it. And then I would capture that first verse of the poem, okay? And after doing that, then it was like a spiritual imprint that formed an anchor to the energy of that topic that I wanted to share in a poem in a beautiful way. And I could actually go away from it. And sometimes I've written the whole poem in one sitting. Sometimes it's taken over weeks or months. In fact, the compilation of poems you can buy from Divine Whispers, it's on Amazon, is over a 15-year period, compiled over a 15-year period. And I actually went back in my notebook and stuff and found some other poems I'd written that got included in the book that I'd forgotten about. Okay, so sometimes they finished, sometimes they were. I didn't hold myself to a rigid format for every poem, and it's just what felt right, and it felt finished when I had a closure to it in terms of the alignment. But this is what I'm talking about, this alignment with integrity, okay, and in coherence and authenticity of who you are. It's a frequency, and it's measurable, and you can feel that. And so I tuned into that frequency that allowed me to write that poem. And then sometimes it would be the first verse. A lot of times it was. But then a lot of times I would come up with something else, and I'd reorder the verses because there would be kind of an arc or a flow to that. So that's a little insight into my writing process, especially for poetry. But it's based on a real experience of myself and how I explored that and did a deeper in contemplation on that, meditation and contemplation, and that's what inspired the words to write. Now I can give you tons and tons of examples on this. In terms of in leadership, I've shared some of that already, where some things. But again, doing this anchors this abstract thing that I'm talking about, it seems abstract, into a lived experience, because I've lived my whole life that way. I've flown through it that way. And so because of that, this creates an energy or whatever. If I could actually show you the movie of the visions that I've seen of what's coming in the next few years, you'd be blown away by that. So stay tuned and follow the journey with me. That's all I can say. So let's talk about leadership application here. So authenticity as a strategy, right? And so I want to connect this spiritual scientific concept into real world leadership, right? And so you probably wondered, and why do authentic leaders outperform performative leaders? Now, somebody that can perform really well at, say, a CEO level or whatever, knows how to operate a business, so that doesn't necessarily make them an authentic leader. I mean, a really good example of that was John Sculley running Apple, right, when Steve Jobs left. And Apple just didn't turn around until Steve Jobs came back to Apple and turned that all around, okay? So because there's an authenticity to Steve Jobs, it's a great example of where his frequency, his leadership inspired innovation in ways that were not happening. Because it does take, inspiration means, from the Latin, means in spirit, which means being connected in spirit to that realm. So if you think you're going through life leaving that pillar out of your life, well, you're not going to get what you want out of life, okay? You just aren't. And so this is why I'm very transparently talking about this spirit beat science and this bringing this together. And that's why this book is so important, because yes, there are books out there in conscious leadership, but I'm taking it even one step further. I'm bringing in this abstract in a way where even with technology today, we can actually measure that and show that, even though you already know it because you've been in those experiences where that's happened for you. So what happens when those authentic leaders come into coherence with their authenticity and what they're doing? Well, guess what? It boosts their decisiveness. It increases trust, creativity. I just talked about jobs inspiring innovation, and a culture. It changes the culture because people don't follow leaders by their titles. They follow it by their frequency, by what they're putting out into the world energetically. And if it aligns for them, then they're on board. They're advocates to do what you're doing or what they're doing. So this coherence, it gets into a flow where the decisions became more straightforward, right? Now sometimes you are going to have to make hard decisions, but usually it's because it's something that's not in alignment anymore with what you're trying to achieve. And you can get lost. And as things grow and evolve or whatever, you could get lost in that. And we've seen that with leaders. It's happened before. So it's important to stay grounded, stay authentic in the essence of who you are, no matter what you're doing in your ventures or your life, your spiritual journey, with all that. Really, really important to stay close to that. So again, I'm going to give you little tidbits at each of these podcasts is into these different frameworks that we'll use as exercises in the book that's coming out. Okay, so like, for example, energy ledger, courage continuum, integrity resonance, we just talked about that, flow audit, and there's more. So you're going to see more of these leadership application pieces, practices that you can do as a leader yourself, okay? So I think that's going to wrap it up for us here. Let's wrap it up with a closing meditation. And again, we want to really tune into our signal, okay? And so what I want you to do is, again, we're breathing through the nose and out through the mouth. And we want to put our hand over our heart, one on our belly, and we want to breathe in with that. Breathe in deeply, hold that for 2 seconds. And then exhale through the mouth, okay? And as you're doing that, do that 3 or 4 times here. You want to breathe with intention into this and saying to yourself, I align my thoughts, my words, and actions with the truth of who I am. Feel that resonance as you're breathing in. Close your eyes. Feel that energy. Feel that resonance that says, I align my thoughts, words, and actions with the truth of who I am. Okay? This is the frequency I want you to carry into the coming week. And as we journey on this physics of presence over the next several months for season 3. So let's take that with that. So again, thank you for joining me today. And this is our first deep dive into this new arc of this programming that we're doing. And tune in next Sunday, and I'll have an announcement middle of the week here about this for our next episode, and also comes from the book, The Neuroscience of Faith and Belief as Biology. We'll talk about how belief reshapes the brain, how faith is a biochemical signal, how expectation alters identity and outcomes. And to help me do that, I actually have a special guest. Now, I usually don't have guests on my podcast, but that's going to be more of that in the coming episodes as we go through the next several months. It's aligning with people, just like I'm talking about today at Coherence. So I've aligned with somebody who is also in our startups.com network as a founder. And we really connected and aligned as well. And so this is actually, it's not a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. There's always synchronicity. But the fact that I was talking about, I already mapped out the roadmap for the arc through the next season. And next week's the next episode is about the neuroscience of faith. And this fits right into his background really well. So it's going to be a really awesome discussion. So stay tuned for announcement the coming week here about that. And we'll do that as well. Again, thank you for joining. I invite you to subscribe or follow me on this weekly journey, or bi-weekly. It depends on my schedule and so on. But every Sunday I try to do this podcast. And why do I do it live? Because it's more authentic, I think. I could just record this and then do a bunch of post-production, and then boom, there's the episode for you. And a lot of podcasts are produced that way. And maybe from a practical standpoint, I probably will do that. But I really like the essence of this being live on the fly, because I'm speaking from the heart. I'm speaking authentically about my experiences. And I didn't plan most of what I talked about. I just had a framework for it. And then it just fits naturally. And again, this is about being in the flow. This is about being in alignment on your journey and where you're going. So again, you can go visit my website, drbillclark.life. And you can follow me on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, X, and Facebook. And LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Instagram. Sorry, I know I forgot one. But anyway, you can go follow along there. And that's where I usually post announcements for upcoming episodes, or post-production of this episode. There'll be an announcement for this, and it'll be available on the website, as well as you can listen to it through Spotify and other platforms, stuff like that. So again, thank you for joining me today. I'm Dr. Bill. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you when I see you on the next episode of Beyond Limits.